Question number 6. In lines 9 through 20, the desire to write is seen chiefly as what? A. The evidence of wit. Notice that the poetry one produces is used as evidence of wit. That's why they want to produce it, to show our wit, as you can see in line 20. But this isn't what the question is asking. The question asks what the desire to write is seen as. Just the desire to produce poetry isn't evidence of wit. Everyone, remember, has been bitten with this poetic itch or this desire, so just desiring it doesn't prove that one has wit. They actually have to produce poetry in order to prove that. So this answer, while it might seem like the right one if you're not reading and thinking carefully, is not correct. We can eliminate A. B. A political threat. There's no indication that the desire to write poetry is seen as a political threat. C. The result of meditation. Notice that line 19 says that they wake each morning in a raging fit and call for pen and ink so that they can write poetry. So the desire to write isn't the result of meditation. They're in a raging fit, which is the opposite of meditation. So C is incorrect. D. A need for self-justification. Their desire to write is not seen as a need to justify oneself or one's actions. There isn't anything we can find that brings us to that conclusion. So this doesn't work. D is incorrect. E. An irresistible compulsion. So in lines 9 and 10, we see that a poetic itch has seized everyone. In line 19, we have people waking in a raging fit, wanting to write poetry, even after regretting it and promising their friends in lines 17 and 18 to stop doing it. This makes it sound like they can't really help themselves, so E, an irresistible compulsion, is the best answer. Question number 7. In lines 15 through 20, the speaker regards himself as what? A. Superior to other rhymesters. Rhymesters are poets, and the speaker clearly considers himself their equal. He says that not blank self e'er tells more fibs than I, indicating that some poet, whose name he doesn't tell us, doesn't tell more fibs than he does. A fib is a lie, and in this context, the author is calling these poems fibs or pieces of fiction. So he's saying that he does just as much as other poets. However, he doesn't indicate that he considers himself superior. So A is incorrect. B, essentially a moralist. There's no indication that he regards himself as one who teaches or promotes morality. C, more learned than other poets. He doesn't say anything about his education or his learning here, so no, C is incorrect. D, genuinely repentant of his errors. This answer might tempt you because he talks in lines 17 and 18 about deploring the folly or foolishness of writing poetry, and he promises not to do it anymore. But then, along with the others, he gets right back up in the morning in that raging fit and starts writing poetry again. If he were genuinely repentant, he wouldn't start writing poetry again the very next morning. Even so, this might be a tempting answer if there weren't a better one. So let's look at the better answer, which is E, another example of an incorrigible breed. Incorrigible indicates an inability to be reformed or improved, which definitely describes these poets who swear off poetry and then wake in a raging fit and begin writing it again. The speaker is including himself in this number by saying we, so E is the best answer here. Question number 8. The main point made about writers and poets in lines 21 through 28 is that they what? If you look at this passage, you'll see that in lines 21 through 26, the speaker talks about several professions and what workers in those professions have to do before they can practice. So, no one sets up a shop, which means to open a business, without first serving an apprenticeship in that business. Doctors travel to France and even learn to dance before they can practice medicine. Pope is being a little humorous here, but we'll talk more about that later. And bridge builders can't build bridges until they've learned to drive piles or bridge supports. In other words, all these professions have to practice and learn how to do the various kinds of work associated with whatever it is they want to be. And then he starts a contrast in line 27 with the word but. But those who cannot write and those who can all rhyme and scrawl and scribble to a man. The speaker is saying that when it comes to writing, it doesn't matter if someone can write or if someone can't. Whether one has the ability or talent or not, everyone is writing anyway. So A, they feel no need to study or learn their art, is the main point that's being made about writers and poets in lines 21 through 28. A is the correct answer. But let's look at the rest of the answers anyway. B, are all about equally untalented. Clearly this isn't true. In line 27, the speaker indicates that there are some who can't write and some who can. C, prefer to write than to do useful work. There's no indication of this. For one thing, the speaker doesn't indicate that writing is not useful. and as a matter of fact, he mentions some uses for it later on. But more importantly, in this particular set of lines, he isn't contrasting preferences, but rather the actions of people who have chosen particular professions. We can eliminate C. D. Will never achieve the greatness of people in other professions. The problem with this is similar to the one with C. The speaker is not commenting on or comparing or contrasting the merits of writing poetry with the merits of other professions, or the greatness of members of the writing profession with members of other professions. Rather, he's contrasting writers' actions with the actions of other professionals. Poets might achieve as much greatness as anyone else. He just doesn't address it. So D is incorrect. And finally, E is the main point made about writers and poets that they make themselves ridiculous by attempting to ridicule others. There is no support for this at all, so we can just get rid of it. Again, the correct answer for this question is A. The point being made is that writers and poets feel no need to study or learn their art. Question number 9. Lines 23 and 24 suggest that Radcliffe's doctors what? So the lines in question are, even Radcliffe's doctors travel first to France, nor dare to practice till they've learned to dance. So we have A, are as much concerned with social accomplishments as with medical training. This sounds like a good answer because the line says that they don't dare practice or perform the work of a doctor until they've learned to dance, which is a social accomplishment. So if they don't dare practice until they've achieved the social accomplishment of dancing, then they're apparently as much concerned with one as the other. So A is a good choice. B, prefer French medical education to English. Even though the lines indicate that they're going to France for some portion of their education, it doesn't indicate that they prefer French education, so no. C, are more skilled as physicians than entertainers. Even if the dancing referred to here is entertainer-type dancing, there's still nothing in these lines to say that Radcliffe's doctors are more skilled in dancing than in the practice of medicine, so we can eliminate C. D, have more interest in the writing of poetry than in the practice of medicine. Nope, there's nothing in these lines to indicate that Radcliffe's doctors have any interest in writing. Don't get confused and go back to the idea that everyone has been seized with the poetic itch, so Radcliffe's doctors must be seized with it as well. That might be true, but remember that the question is referring to these two lines specifically. Stay in the context of the question. We can eliminate D. E, are more skillful because of their dedication to fine arts. Even though some forms of dance are considered fine art, there isn't any indication that the doctors are more skillful as doctors because they learn to dance. So E is not the best answer. That leaves us going back to A, that Radcliffe's doctors are as much concerned with social accomplishments as with medical training. This is the answer that fits best, and it's the correct choice. Just as an extra note, because it's good to know things, the reference in these two lines has a specific historical connection. John Radcliffe was a well-known doctor in England in the 17th century, and Alexander Pope was one of his more famous patients. When Radcliffe died, he left part of his money in the form of fellowships for medical students to travel to other places for part of their medical training. Alexander Pope didn't really approve of the idea, and he's making fun of it here. Question number 10. Beginning in line 29, the speaker does which of the following? If we look at the passage, we see that he begins with the word yet, which as we know is like saying but or however or in spite of all this. So we know that he's most likely staying on the same subject, but that he's going to talk about it from another angle. And when we read the first two lines, lines 29 and 30, yet, sir, reflect the mischief is not great. These madmen never hurt the church or state. We notice that he's going to talk about these madmen. That word lets us know that he's specifically referring to something that he's already been talking about. So we can be pretty sure that A, begins to comment on another subject, is incorrect. B, summarizes his previous argument. Probably not, since the first word is yet. That word is a clue that he's not going to summarize, but possibly contrast or qualify something. But let's look anyway. Has he been making an argument up to this point in the poem? Let's see. He describes an earlier, more serious time in English history, and then he goes on to describe the time since the poetic itch has seized everyone, a more frivolous time in which incorrigible people like himself are compelled in a raging fit to write poetry. He goes on further to contrast the preparations that those in other professions have to make with the zero preparatory work that writers and poets do. They just rhyme, scribble, and scrawl when the fit hits them, whether they have talent or not. So up to this point, he hasn't really been making an argument for anything. He's just been describing the position of affairs as he sees them. We can eliminate B. C, qualifies his previous position. This immediately sounds better because the word yet, when used in this way, is a qualifying word. We say things like, I just got through telling you all this, and yet there is this to consider. So if we read lines 29 and 30 again, we see that he says, "Yet, sir, reflect, the mischief is not great. These madmen never hurt the church or state." These madmen, he says, and if you look back at the lines immediately preceding, as well as the context of the whole poem up to this point, you know that he refers, of course, to the poets. He tells us that they never hurt the church or the state, and then he goes on to say a lot of other positive things about them. Sometimes their folly benefits mankind. Their minds aren't usually tainted with avarice or greed. They don't plot and rebel, etc. And there are even some educational benefits of the poetry they write. So the speaker is indeed qualifying what he says earlier. His descriptions in the first 28 lines establish the poets as sort of madmen, and then he qualifies that by saying, yet they're not so bad after all, and they actually do some good. So B is a very good answer. D provides support for an earlier thesis. No, there is no earlier thesis, and he's not supporting what he said earlier anyway. He is qualifying it. E anticipates an objection to his argument. No, we saw that he isn't making an argument in the first 28 lines, and he isn't anticipating an objection to what he says anyway. He actually seems to expect that he'll meet with agreement in his assessment of the poets as madmen, and he goes on to soften the image of these madmen by pointing out their good qualities. So E is eliminated, and we can go back and say confidently that C qualifies his previous position is the correct response.